Hey everyone, welcome to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Bacasa, and the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast aims to bring the best stories and tips. Stories and tips from those that truly make an impact within the sport of fly fishing. I'll dig into the past, present, and future of our guests, uncovering their amazing story and journey. Join me each week as I interview a new guest from somewhere around the globe. If you're not yet a subscriber, help by subscribing now so I can attract the most influential guests and sponsors to the podcast. Let's make this the top fly fishing specific podcast available. Today's show is brought to you by the following sponsors. Angler's Coffee, a brand of coffee for anglers by anglers. Owner Joan Monahan grew up fly fishing, and after spending 40 years in the coffee industry perfecting blend and brew process, he retired to creating a coffee blend and brand for the sport of his passion. Go to www.anglerscoffee.com and pick up a bag of your choice. My personal favorite is the pre-ground caddis blend. It has a perfect balance of body, aroma, and acidity to kickstart my day. Thank you, Anglers Coffee, for supporting the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. We look forward to supporting you and your business. Again, www.anglerscoffee.com. Dupa Fish, that's D-U-P-E-A fish.com, www.dupafish.com. Coming soon, but head over now, pre-register, and make sure you are ready to receive all the notices of the great deals that we'll be having coming your way. With years of accumulated DIY, Todd and I have traveled and booked experience all over the globe. We know how hard it is to customize a trip to you and your group's particular needs. We will have a comprehensive list of service providers and guides to help you in selecting the perfect trip for your and your party's needs. Book a trip with us and have the adventure of a lifetime. That's Dupa Fish, www.dupafish.com. All right, everyone, welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. This is your host, Christian Bacasa, and today I've got a guest from Costa Rica, actually on a Skype line here with Jesse Males. Jesse owns and operates a number of media organizations, all known by Backwater Fly Fishing, and then he has a guide service called 506 Outdoors out of San Jose, Costa Rica, but you guide throughout Costa Rica. So we're going to dive into that here today too. Jesse, good to have you on the show, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So, we've chit-chatted here and there on social media for a while now, and then got to catch up a little bit here before we started up the call. But man, let's dive into how you got into fly fishing.
Yeah, that's a deep one for sure. But it's, I've been fishing kind of like most people, I think, that get into fly. I fished convention kind of my whole life. And then I remember when I was young, seeing a VHS tape my dad had of someone, I think they were catching salmon. And I grew up in Florida, Central Florida. So that was like a completely foreign thing to see. And then they were using these strange rods. And I remember asking my dad about it, and he was kind of like, oh, dude, that's a fly rod, and I didn't think much about it, man, for years until I kind of got into it more after college. But he kind of taught me how to cast at a young age, and I remember catching a few bass and things like that. But the real explosion as far as like real interest and kind of chasing it down wasn't until right about the end of college for me.
What was the impetus from end of college to really kind of kicking it off?
I guess coming out of college, I worked restaurants mainly. I was sort of a restaurant manager, and it kind of got to a point in my life where I was like, what am I doing? And really kind of who am I going to be here after this whole college thing's over?
Right. Yeah.
And I remember just thinking about three things I liked. I was like, I like backpacking, I like camping, and I like fishing. And I guess I'm just going to do those kind of as hard as I can until something budges and I get some direction. I started working at a place called Travel Country Outdoors in Altamont Springs, Florida, and just was like a kayak expert. There was a little fly shop in there. This dude Gary used to run, and then it kind of just like I kind of just chased it down and I didn't have a lot of friends that fly fished. And it was really, I spent probably 2 or 3 years just like paddling a beat up kayak around Mosquito Lagoon back then and just kind of figuring it out. And that's kind of it. I went into Orlando Outfitters a bunch talking to those cats. And I just remember like it taken a kind of a while for me to really feel comfortable with it and feel like it was something I wanted to do sort of long term. But once I kind of got in that direction, it was full bore for sure.
That's pretty cool. What kind of species were you targeting in those areas?
Yeah, the Mosquito Lagoon systems, pretty much all our saltwater inshore species, but the main 4 would be sea trout, redfish, snook, and tarpon. And then seasonally, we had a lot of black drum that would come in there. And the water quality issues have been just rampant since then. But back when I really got into it, it was still really good, man. There was a lot of clean grass flats, and it was just like a great place to go out all by myself and just really mess up time and time again until I got it right and developed some skills, to be honest.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. What kind of boat were you running? Was it kayak? And you said, was it?
Yeah, so I didn't have, I've kind of always fished off of paddle crafts. Like I grew up fishing out of canoe and then started fishing out of a kayak. And at that time, actually, I was just like, I mean, I'm right out of college. I had no money at all. I had just gotten married to my wife, and like all my finances were going to like just getting our family going and things. And I had, and I think it was called a Sundance. I want to say it was like a sit inside, like just a pleasure cruising kind of kayak. It wasn't fishing related or nothing. And I remember I would kind of kneel down on the top back portion of it, and like just so I could see enough to sight fish.
Yeah.
And that's all I did, dude. I paddled that thing around, and I had like I had a 5-weight like trout rod. It wasn't even made for saltwater. I just made do with what I kind of had.
Yeah, yeah.
And it might be why it took so long to develop the right skills, but I had some times out there, man, all by myself, just pushing it around.
That is cool, man. That sounds like a lot of fun. It sounds like like you said, youthful kind of adventure going on, figuring out yourself and the fishing at the same time. That's cool. Very cool. So then you made a transition from that to, being a professional. You've got all these social networks. I mean, it's obvious you're a great angler, and you've captured a lot of incredible moments. Tell us a little bit about, your channels and, where you're at now.
Yeah, certainly, man. I appreciate the compliments in there too. It's definitely, when it comes to being an angler, I think there's definitely something that's been with me kind of forever in that. And just sort of kind of realizing that this is sort of like my gift and going at it in a serious way, like in a hardcore kind of way. That sort of brought all these things together. And I remember when I started, the feeling of like not being able to get information out of people, like you kind of ask people about spots or about techniques or about flies, and you kind of get these like roundabout answers. At least I did back then.
Yeah.
So when I started figuring out, one of the big things was just like teaching people sort of the fly patterns I liked, the gear, a little bit about gear, but not really, more about just techniques and flies, and then sharing some of my experiences through media, sort of is how it all kind of happened. And it was just a big snowball, really, but really wanting to make it easier for people coming into the sport, a little easier than I had it at least, has always been something that I've kind of carried. And that transitions into the YouTube channel with all the fly tying videos and, those types of things.
How long ago was that? You say back then, but how long ago was that?
let's see, I'm 33. We're talking 13 years probably. And then I started the YouTube channel maybe only, and most of the social stuff really only within the last 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that was out of sort of necessity, like coming into Costa Rica and kind of needing to use the internet basically, but social media and YouTube and things as a way to showcase sort of what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of how it happened organically. And then, yeah, it's just nonstop since then. And it's actually something I've just grown to be more and more passionate about. So it's something I've always just continued, and the photography and the video aspect of it, is definitely a big part of it now, because I've developed those skills, throughout the years too.
Yeah.
And it's something that now I make money with the camera. I make money with the guiding. I make money with flies. And it's like my life is just this. It's all centered around fly fishing, but kind of covering every angle on it too.
Yeah, that's cool. I like it. You got the multitude of revenue streams that's supporting your passion. Very neat. Very neat. Let's do this too. Before I forget, your channels. The name of your channel is at Backwater Fly Fishing. I follow you on Instagram, but I recently started following you on YouTube. I didn't recognize as much of a following as you had on YouTube, and the quality of the stuff you're putting out is really nice, man. I love all the different camera angles and really make it entertaining. So I'd recommend everyone on the show, go check them out, especially the YouTube channel at Backwater Fly Fishing. Really cool. And you've got some great playlists in there. You want to learn how to tie flies, there's like whole playlists on that. There's playlists on just, films. I turn it on when I'm cooking dinner or just hanging out and like let those things rip, man. So it's been enjoyable for me. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. It's definitely a cool thing. I mean, it's cool for me too. Like I find myself every now and again, like going back and watching some of those videos, of trips or of the old flies and stuff, and just being like, wow, like everything just continuously evolves. And it's cool to have those things sort of, it's like a photo album, man. Like that's how I view a lot of this, like especially the Instagram thing and the YouTube, because you could just go back and check those things out, and it's kind of surreal sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. To see your own personal development and whatnot. Yeah. I can only imagine.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a catalog of your life past couple years.
No, it totally is. Yeah. And luckily I've had some just amazing experiences and opportunities in the outdoors to even be able to capture, I'm definitely extremely blessed with no shortage of cool times in the outdoors, whether it's stateside or Costa Rica or, other places in Central America. It's definitely been a runaround, and it's cool to be able to go check those memories out.
Yeah. Tell us about one of those adventures in the States.
Oh man. Well, one of the coolest things was when I really started fly fishing based in Florida. We didn't have, a really way to fish trout, right? Like your Central Florida, it's either saltwater or bass. So mainly I would go to North Georgia, and that was like the closest trout fishing to me. But I had done a really rad, one of the things that really got me hooked on learning how to trout fish well, was a backpacking trip I did with my little brother. And we did a big loop in the Wind River Range in Wyoming. And that trip was I'd say it was about 100 miles of trail, because we went kind of south and started on the north end south and just did this big circle. But we fished these alpine lakes. There was like all these connecting creeks, and it was mainly all cutthroat, but it was just one of those iconic trips where we ran into black bears, we ran into wolves, and caught fish. Like it was definitely the trip that made me really want to learn to not just saltwater fish and bass fish, but also kind of chase down that trout game too, the mountain trout game. That kind of like was kind of ironic is what kind of I had seen when I was young too on the VHS tape, was like this sort of out of touch trout and salmon game. so that was kind of like always an iconic trip I always think about. And me and my brother still talk about to this day, just running into bears and running into waking up and seeing wolves across the lakes and elk and all. You know, as a Florida boy, that stuff is wild, you know,
Yeah,
like
I'm
you don't
sure.
see that stuff where I grew up at, you know.
How long were you on that trip?
We did about 8 days in there in the mountains. But it was a 2 week kind of trip for us. We fished the North Platte and we fished some other areas around there, but the main bulk of it was spent on sort of this big backpacking loop in the mountains.
Very cool. And what's your brother like, man? Tell me a little bit about your brother. Sounds like you guys have had some adventures.
Yeah, I got three brothers. You know, my older brother, he fishes a little bit too, and my youngest brother fishes. And my youngest brother is the one that went on the trip with me, and he's a boat captain in Crystal River, Florida.
What's the name of his outfit? Let's plug him.
His name he does mainly like scallop trips and manatee snorkeling tours and things like that. Not so much fishing.
Okay.
But he works out. I think he works out of Birds Underwater is the name of the company he's working for now.
Very cool. It's always good to have recreational days too with the fam and stuff.
Yeah, totally. And he is funny. All my brothers are so different. None of us are kind of the same. But he fishes too, and he'll go out bass fishing or hit the flats, and mostly in a kayak too. We're all kind of have this sort of connection to paddlecraft. But
do you think it's like the adventure or something, or the exploration side of it?
Yeah, totally. Well, we all growing up, my dad had this aluminum canoe that he had. He says he got it from a Sears catalog, but that's kind of like the classic thing Dad say. I think is like, oh, we just had Sears catalogs back in the day, and that's all we had, dude. And we would repair this thing like every few years with braces and things or glue, and like this thing lasted our whole childhood. We fished. That's all we fished out of. So anytime we wanted to go fishing, we had to throw this aluminum canoe on the top of the van or whatever it was and go dump it somewhere. And that kind of just never stopped. It just like, even now I fish up mainly off paddle boards or, kayaks and things like that. Even here in Costa Rica, when we explored a lot of the rivers, we were running around in a kayak, bombing rivers, running around on inflatable paddle boards, bombing rivers. Like it was just, I don't know, definitely part of the adventure. And then I guess also just being so used to it and it being so portable is huge.
Yeah. And confident, I would assume too. Like, hey, I know I can get through this and this watercraft. That's what I do all the time. Right. I mean,
yeah, exactly. You get so accustomed to it, and there's a simplicity about it, like if all you have is your board and a paddle, or a kayak and a paddle, that kind of cleans it up, and you don't have to worry about a motor or gas or oil or anything breaking. Like there's no moving parts. Like, so as long as you're an able-bodied human, you could get it done,
Yeah. Portage where you need to portage. It's not a big deal. All that stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. Certainly. Yeah. And we've done so much. I mean, even Costa Rica on the Pacific side in the ocean, catching tuna and we took a 16-year-old kid out to catch a blue marlin off the kayak. It's definitely like there's an elite kind of game to the kayak world for sure. And we've been able to dabble in that.
That is cool. And so when you say we, that's a different group. That's not you and your brothers. That's a couple other guys, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I got a good friend who's kind of like my brother. Actually, my good friend Micah Bailey. He's been down here with me the last 6 years and runs the guiding business in Costa Rica with me here. And we've he's a wildcat for sure. He's for a while it was real funny because he's real long hair, like grow his beard out here and there, and then I'm like for a long time ran around like shaved my head. I was like super clean cut, and he was just like kind of jungle bred,
Yeah. And you got the Motley Crue going.
He grew up actually like a mile from me in Florida, and he's like my dad's good friend's son. So I've known him since like he was born, since he came home from the hospital. So he's kind of like my brother in more ways than none, or more ways than you might think. And he's definitely, it's good to have someone you could trust like that when you're in a foreign country doing the type of stuff we're doing. He's insane.
Now,
he'll paddle forever. He'll sit out in the sun forever. Like he'll get, run through the jungle, get bit by mosquitoes forever. He's definitely as crazy as I want to be. He's that crazy. And at the times I'm not trying to be crazy, he carries me. Yes.
That is cool. Definitely. That is cool to have a partner like that. So now, did you guys grow up fishing together too, or did that happen later on in life?
Yeah, definitely. But I'm like, we grew up when we were younger. Yeah. And then once I got into high school, he's about 4 years younger than me. So once I kind of got, 12, 13 years old, we kind of didn't hang out probably for a good 8 years. And then once I kind of started fishing and getting back into things like that, and we sort of reconnected. And I guess there's that weird period in life where like a 4-year age gap is like a deal breaker, then once you're past, like, doesn't matter anymore. And so I guess that's natural. There was that little bit of time there where he was doing his thing, I was doing my thing.
Yeah, at that age, it's big. It's a big difference. I got 2 young girls.
Oh yeah, exactly.
They're 3 years apart, and it's like 2 different worlds. What's going on right now?
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
So we went through that whole deal, but we definitely had a hell of a run around now.
That's good. So let's do this. Let's take a break, hear from our sponsors, and when we get back, I'd love to hear a story about one of your big adventures early in your fly fishing career. Sound good?
Awesome, man.
All right. We'll be right back. Angler's Coffee. We love fueling your next cast. We've been roasting coffee before coffee was cool. www.anglerscoffee.com. Dupa Fish. Coming soon. Pre-register now and get notified. www.dupafish, that's DUPEAfish.com. All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. We've got a great guest today, someone that has been growing up in the Florida area, Jesse Males. Jesse also transitioned from there to Costa Rica, and you've got quite a few channels, like I said, the backwater fly fishing. And then you have a guide service down in Costa Rica, 506 Outdoors. So, Jesse, before we took the break, I asked you to kind of tell us a story about one of the adventures you had early in your fly fishing career. So why don't you go ahead and jump into that, my man?
Yeah, man. So one of the funniest moments I've had kind of in fly fishing, for me personally, and one that I still always end up talking about, especially with my brothers, was really early on when I was paddling around the Mosquito Lagoon trying to learn how to sight fish redfish. I was fishing, like I said earlier in the podcast, off of this sit inside kayak that I would like kneel down kind of on the back of it just so I could see into the water well enough to sight fish. And I remember it was so unstable, you couldn't even like pee out of the thing. So when I had to take a piss, I'd have to stop and pull over on the bank and get out of the thing. And I remember I was fishing the north end of the Indian River lagoon system, and there's all these dike roads that they've dug. So like when you stop on the edge, you can get out and kind of walk up onto the bank, and there's a rock road typically with a canal on the other side. So you have the lagoon on one side, a little rock road, and then like a short canal on the inside. And I would oftentimes find baby tarpon and snook and stuff in those canals. So I remember getting out one time to take a piss, and I hadn't caught anything all day. It was hot, and I was just sweating. And I get out, and I'm like, I'm going to bring the rod with me, even though I'm just going to go up there, take a piss. I'm going to go look around, see what's up there. And I walk up, cross over the little rock road, and I'm standing on what's like just a little canal, man. It's like 20 feet across, and I'm not seeing nothing. It's really dark water in there, and you're really just casting through alligator slides where the gators have kind of made openings in the bushes. And I'm standing there taking a piss or whatnot, and I'm just kind of waiting to see if I see any tarpon roll or see bait or anything. And out of nowhere, this monster redfish, I measured him on my rod length. I didn't have something to measure with back then, but I remember it was about 43 inches, which is a pretty big redfish, you know, considered a bull redfish. And it comes swimming down the canal, like on the surface of the water, and just lit up like bright orange, pushing a wake. And I had my 5-weight with a really small Clouser minnow on it. And I remember thinking like, oh, I'm going to have one shot at this fish as he comes through, because you couldn't really cast in the position I was in, because I had mangroves on each side of me, and I'm kind of looking through this little doorway. So as it comes through the opening in the bushes, I kind of just slung my fly out and dropped it right in front of its face. And as it's swimming, it kind of just flared its gills and sucked it in and kept on going. And I hooked that thing, and it just went crazy. And the canal's like dead straight. So it's like straight for about 100 yards, and then it goes straight right. So 90-degree cut in the canal. So and I can't run down the bank or do anything. So I hook it, and it just turns around and goes, 100 miles an hour down the canal, because it's the only way to go.
Right. And you got a 5-weight.
Yeah, just rip and drag, and I'm kind of like, there's big alligators in this area. I mean, it's common to see 10, 12-foot alligators out there in these canals. So I'm kind of like not trying to get in the water, but then also not trying to lose this redfish. So I'm kind of like reaching out through the little doorway of mangroves, and my line is just tangled in all the branches. And this thing kind of gets to where it's going to go around the corner of the canal, and I'm just like hanging on for dear life. And luckily I was able to stop the fish, but I ended up having to jump in, ripping the edges of these mangroves off with my hands, just trying to untangle my line, working around some little palm trees. And I don't even know how, but I ended up landing the fish and was just like amazed or whatever. And I had like it's probably a flip phone, some type of phone with a camera on it, but it was super basic. And I took a few photos of the fish, sort of by the kayak and by the fly rod. And I don't know whatever happened to them. They're probably on Facebook or something like that, knowing Facebook, but it was one of those times where I'm all alone. I got nobody to really see it. And the only thing I could think of doing was like calling my dad. I remember calling my dad afterwards and being like, Dad, I caught this giant fish, and all trying to explain it to him. And I remember just not being that impressive and just feeling like, man, I'm out here like addicted to this stuff, and, all by myself, got nobody into it. And it's still one of those moments that after that I was hooked. I mean, there's nothing, you couldn't keep me out of the Indian River lagoon system after that. Like it was every chance I could get. I was out there, period, Yeah. And that's definitely a fish that's probably got more to do with my career in fly fishing now than anything else,
One of those moments, man, where you're just like, did you see that? Oh my God. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I love how you went back to basics and like, I'm just calling my dad. Call my dad.
Oh yeah. Just default, call pops and be like, hey man, like this just happened. And
he's of course probably like, yep, that's cool.
Yeah, my dad, he's always been like the most supportive dude with like, he kind of taught me how to fish and stuff. So it's like, even now we don't fish together too much, but anytime something insane happens, he's probably the first to know.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I love that, man. Well, then you made a big transition. You've gone down to Costa Rica, you live down there, and you're working with Micah, building the guide service, but you guys guide all over the country. Let's start to talk about that. What tell me a little bit about the regions that you're guiding in, and then let's then dive into some of the species you're targeting as well.
Yeah, so Costa Rica is, it's a very small country, relatively speaking. Like, it's about the size of West Virginia, but it's very mountainous, so it's dense. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in this little place. We got two oceans, the Caribbean side and the Pacific side, and both holding, different species. And then you have mountains that go up to, 12,000 feet. And then you have sort of lowland jungle rivers and marshes. So we have, everything from trout to billfish, really. Like, we fish, we do trout, we do tarpon on the Caribbean. We book trips for sailfish and marlin and stuff like that through some partners we have in Capos. And then we personally guide one of our favorite species is called a machaca, which lives in a lower land kind of jungle river scenario. And it's much like floating a river out west or something. We go down in NRS rafts with frames, kind of built for fly fishing. So it's a really cool just river float, and they mainly eat a fruit kind of pattern. So we use sort of an unconventional fly that we've made that kind of looks like a fruit that falls from a tree called a chilamate. And then we fish guapotes, which is a rainbow bass. And we're working on some other fish, lower land fish species, one called a mohara, and then another one that's machine. So there's sort of a wide range of fishing opportunities here, and honestly figuring out which ones are conducive to bringing clients to is sort of the challenge,
Yeah. And so what are you taking into consideration when you're talking to your clients? How do you narrow it down for them?
Well, one of our biggest problems, not problems, but one of our biggest hurdles is we have filmed us doing a lot of kind of crazy stuff and put it on YouTube. So, clients will contact us and say, "Oh, do you do this as a tour?" And we're like, "Well, we do that, but either you have to hike in really far or it's in the middle of nowhere and the people are, there's a lot of things to take into consideration when you're going to bring a client into a place that, is as far out as some of the places we go. So every client's different. We build a lot of custom fishing packages for people. And the cool thing is we could, in a week's time, you could catch a trout, catch a tarpon, catch a machaca, and catch a sailfish, so you could run the gamut through both coasts and the mountains and the lowlands, in a 7-day stretch. So there's a lot to offer.
Very cool. This fish you're talking about, the machaca, can you describe that for our listeners?
Yeah, the machaca is it's a cousin to the piranha, and it's really there's smaller or there's larger kind of cousins even to the machaca that live in the Amazon and stuff. In Nicaragua and Costa Rica and Panama, we have a number of different species that a big one is going to be 8 to 10 pounds. So when you're thinking of fish, I mean, I guess it's a relatively small fish, but it fights really hard. We target them on 8 weights, and they do have very, very sharp piranha-like teeth. So if 80-pound fluoro gets in the mouth, it's gone.
Yeah, they're like a giant panfish, right? I mean,
no, it's like it's going to look like a shad. It looks a lot like a giant shiner, like shad thing, but then the face is all gnarly.
Okay.
And
I'm thinking of a pacu, I think.
Yeah, exactly. You're thinking of pacu, yeah. And the machaca, it's very visual fishing. We fish them on these fruit flies, so it's all top water. It's in a beautiful setting. And you could float these rivers and not see anybody, and it's really, really awesome. The cool thing about it too is it's a year-round thing. You could fish them, all year. And mainly the good time is when the water's a little dark. So it's sort of the opposite of like a trout, where if the river's blown out and you're trout fishing, it's difficult. Here, the fish get more active because there's more food in the water.
Mm-hmm.
So a rainy day is a machaca fisherman's kind of dream. And luckily, being here in the rainforest in Costa Rica, you have a lot of rain. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool. And then, like, what's your average day? Like, describe an average day and how it starts and finishes, or are these multi-day trips?
So the machaca thing's pretty cool. It's about 2 hours north of San Jose. There's a number of rivers we can fish. So it works like a good day trip for people being in San Jose or people being in the surrounding area. And you could shoot out there. We usually have breakfast at a local restaurant at around 7, kind of meet up there, and then meet up with our local guide. We like to use local rafting guides there that we've partnered with that know the river really well. So we'll go along on the trip. Usually I'll go along, take photos, or go along and just, kind of chauffeur the whole experience for the people instead of just turning them loose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially on a fish that's so unique. There's a certain cast you have to do, and the whole experience is super rad. We kind of get to the river around 8:30 and kind of end around 2:30, but we'll stop and have lunch on the river, and you could see any number of different monkey species. We'll have macaws flying overhead, toucans, those little caimans, and even surprisingly, all the way up into that river system, you'll occasionally see carp in there as well, and that's a few hundred river miles from the oceans. It's a pretty diverse area when you really stop and think about it, but the main fish species that are there is definitely the machaca, and there's a lot of them. So
yeah, you see some snook up that far too, I would assume.
Yeah, you will. You'll catch some small snook in there if you throw streamers and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But you kind of have to work for those little guys. And unfortunately, in that river system, most of them are small, like in the 12 to 18-inch range. So you don't see a lot of big ones that far up into those freshwater areas. But it's very much a machaca fishery, and we're kind of happy about that too, because it probably our thing. And when we first started exploring those areas, me and Micah, we ended up just going off of stand-up paddleboard, inflatable paddleboards. So we would just kind of find places we could dump into the river and get out somewhere near a town and hike into town and get a taxi to take us back to the car. And it was just very much a learning experience. And then figuring out the flies and designing the flies in a way that was going to kind of help the hookup ratio, because they do slash at the fly a lot versus eating the whole thing every time. So it's sort of a game. If you could hook 20% of the fish that hit your fly, then you're a pretty good machaca fisherman, is sort of what we found.
Okay, very cool. You talked about a special cast. Describe that special cast that you have to make.
Yeah, so the cast is funny, man. It's very untraditional in the fly, and it looks ugly, to be frank. Like, the fruit, you got to imagine these fish are sitting under these chilamate trees, and they're waiting for these fruit to fall. So the fruit falls vertically, off the branch, straight down into the water, and the fish see it far before it hits the water. So when you have a school of machacas, they're going to fight, each other to get to that first. So they're all looking up, waiting for these things to fall. So when you cast, if you cast sort of horizontally, like you might lay a fly down, it's going to come in at the wrong angle. So you have to, when you're machaca fishing, do this weird sort of high cast and let the whole cast unfurl to where it starts dropping, so that the first thing that hits the water is the round fruit fly, and you want it coming straight down into the water. So it's just weird.
What do you do? You end your cast with your rod tip high, and then you just kind of short line the cast too. So
most of the casts are 40 feet, is a far one, and partly because the fish is going to hit so fast, before the droplets of the fly, from the fly landing are gone, that fish is eating it. So it's immediate and very ferocious sort of on the surface. So you kind of slam it hard because you want it to hit the water hard like a fruit would that's falling from 40 feet in the air.
All right.
So you slam it, and then you got to be ready immediately to do this crazy trout set, strip strike, hook set to get that fish, because he'll know, immediately too, that wooden ball is not the real thing.
Yeah.
So they're very smart, and it's a very funny game. If you're going down the river, you could have, it's 50, 60 bites, and you might end up with 5 fish to your hand, So it's a really funny game.
Huh. That sounds cool. And so are the trees pretty tall then? Because it sounds like you're not casting in under low cover.
Yeah, so you'll have the tree itself is very tall, and you'll have lower hanging branches. So the cast, is oftentimes just woven through gaps in the branches and things like that. So there is some technical ability in the sense of aiming, but the cast itself is just so ugly that even filming it at times is laughable when you're just watching it back on the computer.
It's almost like Humphrey's upper downer cast, right? I mean, you're really ending that high and making it just plunge, like you said. Huh.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Huh. Very cool. Very cool. But you target other species. So you go oceanside, and what are you targeting? Tarpon at the river mouths, I would assume, and then it sounds like you do some other stuff, probably some triggers and jacks and stuff.
Totally. Yeah, so the ocean sides, the Caribbean is pretty much all tarpon. There's probably one of the best tarpon fisheries in the world is here. There's no doubt. I mean, and it was the sort of the mecca of tarpon fishing in the 70s, early 80s. What was happening in Barra del Colorado on the border of Nicaragua and Costa Rica back then was really where a lot of our saltwater development came from in terms of gear. All your big names. I mean, you do quick research on a place called Casa, you'll find just how iconic the place was. And we've been super blessed to be able to go kind of behind some of these guys and fish these areas. And we guide out there now through 506 Outdoors. And it's certainly, I'm from Florida, so I've tarpon fished a lot. And some of the stuff we see up there as far as numbers of fish is just otherworldly. It's probably the largest congregation of tarpon anywhere on planet Earth, I would imagine. I don't know any other place that has more fish than that. Mm-hmm. And most of the river mouths on the Caribbean side have tarpon, and so do the rivers. But the main places are up north and then all the way south where Tarponville is on the border of Panama down south. So sort of the two extremes of the Caribbean side, all great tarpon fisheries. That's something we're really opening up 2022. COVID obviously beat us up the last few years on it, but we're slamming it next year. And that's a very seasonal fishery. Pretty much you get kind of windows based around the weather, kind of around April, May, June, and then September, October. And then Pacific side, famous blue marlin fish. We have rooster fish here, which is another really cool thing to have. Mm-hmm. This just frustrates you for sure, but it's definitely one worth targeting.
Which species really cool was that? Sorry, you cut out. What species was that?
The rooster fish.
The rooster fish. Okay.
Yeah. So unlike unlike other areas places where you could kind of hit them from the beach, here the beaches aren't very conducive for that. So we kind of run boats sort of on the outside of the breakers, and you could tease them up really easily, kind of like you would a sailfish, like a billfish. And you kind of tease them up behind the boat and do like a really cool bait and switch with them. And that's just a lot of fun.
You teasing them with like a squid pattern or more of like a stick bait or something like that?
Yeah, so you could run, you could tease them up real easily, trolling poppers or stick baits, and sort of or a live bait if you have that. They'll come up for most things, and then that quick when that thing is red, whether it's the lure or live bait or whatever, that guy rips it out, and the guy with the fly switch it, and it's really, really well, which is part of the fun. So it's pretty cool. You'll be surprised how smart those fish get. Like, you'll see them come up and just sort of sniff the back of the fly and turn off. Like, they're, even when they're up, so they're very what isn't, but you one that's just not paying attention, and you get.
I'm gonna interrupt you real quick, Jesse. We're really breaking up here. I know you're in Costa Rica calling in on Skype line. Let's take a quick break, see if we can get that fixed, and we'll be right back. All right, everyone, welcome back. Yeah, we've obviously got Jesse down in Costa Rica. It's all often difficult to get a good signal, et cetera. So we were starting to break up there. We've got a good signal again. So we're going to fire back up right where we're at. Jesse, you were describing fishing for rooster fish, and in particular, we were talking about how you were teasing them up, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. It's very much like a sailfish or marlin, and you could tease them right up behind the boat and do a really cool bait and switch on them with the fly, and whether it's a plug or live bait that you're teasing them up with. It's a very much kind of a fun game to see how well you could bait and switch them, because it has to be done just right. And as soon as that bait or lure comes out, the fly has to be landing. And if you can get a clean switch on a fired up fish, then, you know, you have a good shot at him eating the fly. But they're so smart that they'll come right behind the fly, and it's almost like they're scenting it, and they'll turn off it sometimes. But they're a stubborn fish species anyways. The rooster fish is definitely a stubborn fish to get on a fly, but we do that as well.
And are you when you're switching them, are you putting that fly right wherever that teaser was? I mean, right on top of it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It has to be done, you know, so cleanly. It's really funny. There is a video on my YouTube channel that we have of doing that, and you could see just how smart the fish are. Like, when you watch them in slow motion coming up to the fly, you could tell that they're analyzing everything so fast. And it's really, really cool.
It's one thing I've seen the same thing with muskie fishing. Like, when I am fishing for muskie, I'm throwing that fly out, but one of the biggest things I make sure I do is that fly has to be coming towards the boat and away from the shore when it lands. And I learned that early on from a buddy of mine that was a muskie fisher when I was fishing crankbaits and stuff. But my experience in a lot of saltwater scenarios, when you're baiting switching, that's a key component. Like, you throw that thing out there, and as soon as it's hitting the water, it's really got to be coming back in the same direction as the teaser.
Yeah, it has to be moving. Yeah, you can't, if it's still at all, it's game over. They're not interested. And they like a fast moving lure or fly or whatever. The rooster really want something moving fast.
Yeah.
Kind of just help trigger that kind of predatorial response, I guess.
Yeah.
And the more you can play on those types of instincts with these fish, the better off you're going to be as far as your success rate. But it's still very visual and very much, you know, technique oriented. So for the fly angler, it's a lot of fun.
Very cool. And then do you do some shore-based stuff or some reef-based stuff or you're fishing like triggers and things like that?
Yeah, totally. There's trigger fish on the Caribbean side. And there's bonefish and permit too, but they're sort of in this reserve area that makes it an area that we just don't go in and guide at. And it makes it hard for anyone really to get in. Like, we've gone in on our paddle boards and paddled around the entire park, which is a pretty good paddle, just to get out there and try and fish. And it's doable, but it's definitely not guide territory. And then we do a lot of remote beach camping trips too, where we'll go out mainly northern Pacific side and camp on some very remote beaches and bring paddle boards and kayaks and fish from the beach, fish, you know, both fly and spinning, but definitely a lot of fly opportunities involved there. And the Pacific side, really, our favorite thing is yellowfin tuna, because there's some really good spots where those fish come in, a few hundred yards off the beach, and you could target them. So it's the yellowfin tuna game is probably our favorite thing to catch. And then we'll get Dorado and Cubera snapper, and we've caught African pompanos, and you'll see milkfish. It's anything can happen when you get off the coast in the Northern Pacific. We've seen sailfish up under the kayaks. Like, you just don't know what's going to happen up there, and it's a wild area, and it really makes really good beach camping. You get these really nice. Oh, geez, I don't know if you heard that. I had another call coming.
That's okay.
But you get these wild, really nice remote beaches where you don't have any buildings on them.
Uh-huh.
And we'll just go out and camp, set up a base camp for 3-4 days with people, and that's another one of our real favorite things to do.
That sounds awesome. The yellowfin, how are you targeting them?
Well, in those scenarios, it's difficult in the sense that when we do the beach camping, we pretty much are bringing paddlecraft. So you can, if someone's used to being in a kayak, we typically go in a tandem kayak. So the client's sort of in the front and they have the guide in the back, usually either me or Micah. And you could throw a fly offer there into them. It's very easy to get them when they're on the surface. Like, if you can get close to them while they're kind of feeding, then it's almost a sure bet you're going to get a hookup. And then throwing big poppers on spinning gear has been sort of what most of the clients end up towards. It's just way easier to do from a kayak scenario. But then throwing from the surf is obviously key for jacks and snook and little rooster fish. And the surf in Costa Rica can hold, over a dozen species that you can catch on a fly rod. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, and you're just walking the beach and looking for moving fish, and boom.
Yeah, it's looking for bait jumping, and then just looking for areas where there's washouts or a current break or something like that, and you're just usually blind casting. But
yeah,
it's funny. Like, we have a lot of people that contact us right about catching a rooster fish, and it's one of the funniest things is that when I first came to Costa Rica, I didn't fish for like 2 months when I first came here. And we were like, screw it, man, we're going fishing. Like, I don't care if it's from the beach or whatever, we're just going. And we went up in Guanacaste, like northern Pacific side. And I walked out on the beach the very first morning, and I wasn't fishing for 20 minutes. And I saw a little bit of bait jump, made a big long cast, a few strips, and boom, caught a rooster fish on the fly, from the beach. And I'm thinking, first day fishing, and I'm like, man, this is amazing. Like, this place is so good. You catch rooster fish right off the bat. Like, it's going to be epic. And I didn't catch another one for like 2 years. So it was like definitely another one of those times where like a single fish definitely had a huge impact on my perception, and just to get us going. And I definitely needed that fish for sure. But it just goes to show, like, you don't know when you step out in the ocean, like, nobody tells the ocean what to do.
Yeah. That was your tipping point, though, man.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, let's do this. Let's take a quick break, hear from our sponsors. Then when we get back, I want you to break down some of the rod setups for you using for these different species, okay?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, sounds good. Angler's Coffee. We love fueling your next cast. We've been roasting coffee before coffee was cool. www.anglerscoffee.com. Dupa Fish. Coming soon. Pre-register now and get notified. www.dupafish, that's DUPEAfish.com. All right, welcome back, everybody. We've got Jesse Mayles on the line talking Costa Rica. Jesse, before we took the break, you were going to break down your rod setups for the machaca and maybe some other species that you're targeting down there.
Yeah, exactly. The machaca is definitely one of our favorite fish, and unique in so many different ways that, all the way down to the gear that we're using, right? So we're fishing a river fish. It's pretty strong. You're going to have some logs. You're going to have some obstacles in the river that they can definitely get into. So fishing them on 8 weights has been ideal, because especially if you hook one of the larger fish, you need definitely something bigger with a little bit of backbone that's going to handle that. Just very surprising how strong those fish can actually get. And in that quick run, if there's a log or a rock, he's going in there. So 8 weights are our preferred method there. We like floating line for sure, because everything we're doing is on the surface. And we're doing short casts, right? So anything with a shooting head, not a really heavy head, but a shooting head is going to help. And we fish a very short leader. So one thing we've found is that picking up a long leader in the hook set portion of machaca fishing kind of decreases your chance of actually hooking that fish, because you get more slack in it, and keeping the line very tight after the cast is important. So when the water's real dirty, these fish get very active. So you can get away with a 5-foot leader, no problem. And if you're doing the cast right, like we talked about earlier, where that fruit fly is the thing that's hitting the water first, then that's what the fish are going to focus on. So in that sense, a short leader is okay, because that fruit hits, and by the time that fly line comes down, those fish are already pretty much hitting your fly. So,
and what weight leader are you using? Like a 16-pound or something like that?
Yeah, we like to go heavier. Like as the running portion of the leader is typically 20-pound for about 4 feet, you could say. And then you're going to need a bite tippet on there. 60-pound when the water's clear seems to work. And if it's real muddy and chocolatey, then you can get away with throwing 80-pound fluorocarbon. But even that stuff, like if the fish jumps and it gets in its mouth, it's gone like instantly. So there's part of it is getting lucky on that hook set with the big fish. We found using wire doesn't work. Like they'll see the wire and they'll turn off it. So for some reason you can get away with 80-pound fluoro, but you can't get away with a wire leader. So it's one of those things. And luckily you don't lose too many fish.
And are you tying that like a shock tippet with like a?
No, I mean, typically it's legitimately just 4 feet of 20-pound or 30-pound, and then the bite tippet right onto there.
Okay.
We don't, you could get fancy if you wanted to with your leader setups, but when we're catching these fish in these types of scenarios, that short, stiff leader really helps with the hookup ratio, and then also keeps it when that fish is down under a log or in the rocks or whatever, you could bring that fish back out easily. But if it was a scenario where we needed a little more finesse or we needed a little bit of a shock, then we'd go that route. But we found just hammering them with those basic heavy leader setups has been the most productive for sure.
Okay, very cool. So you're tying your 20-pound. How are you connecting those two lines, those two different weight lines in your leader?
Just a double surgeons, to be completely honest. Something we could do real fast, like when you're floating down the river, we don't anchor a lot like you would in out west or something. So anytime you're spending rigging or whatever is time that you're wasting by not casting is sort of how we view it.
Yeah.
So, being able to rig that setup in, a minute and a half and get back to fishing, if whatever happens, then that's ideal. So, I mean, just a simple loop connected to the fly line, double surgeons connecting your two leader setups, and then the fly typically has a pretty good size wide gap hook on it. A Daiichi 3111 is typically what I tie most of the flies on. And it's literally just a wooden ball that's painted green with spray paint. It's like the craziest thing. Definitely a fly you don't want to get hit in the back of the head with. Which is funny, actually. The first guided machaca tour I did, the guy was in the front of the raft. We had our local guy rowing it, and I was in the back, and the client hooked me right through the ear with the machaca. So that was maybe 5 minutes into the trip. So it was like a very rude awakening to me that you got to watch out for these flies. For sure.
Yeah, for sure. Are you tying the fly on with a loop knot of some sort?
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Yeah.
All right, very cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have another pretty specific setup that you use for tarpon, I'm assuming.
Yeah, certainly. The tarpon scenario where we're guiding and where we do most of our fishing is in a river mouth scenario. So you're sort of on the outside of the breakers in the open ocean, and it's muddy water. You got Rio Colorado's dumping out there, and it's just pure chocolate. So you're not sight fishing like you do in the Keys where you're spotting cruising fish. There are times where the fish will be schooled up, kind of like tuna, and you just pull into like a pot of fish, and there's tarpon flying out of the water, and you're casting into them. That's very cool, obviously, because that's not a very typical tarpon fishing scenario, but it happens quite often there.
And
for whatever reason.
Competing with tons of jacks and whatnot, I'm sure too, right?
Yeah, it's just absolute mayhem when that's kind of happening, and that's very typical, like late September, October.
Okay.
And then most of the time, though, we're fishing very heavy kind of setups, and you could use the most typical is just an intermediate line, like any intermediate sinking rather, and about 15 feet of lead core. If you're not familiar with lead core, it's just a really heavy like tippet material.
Yeah.
And it sinks, man. Like it's pretty much just like literally the whole core of the thing is lead, and you can get some nasty tangles with it for sure, but the idea is just to rip that thing down because the top layer of that ocean out there is about 4 feet of that muddy river water up top, but below it is gin clear ocean, Caribbean, you know?
Yeah.
So the idea is to get that fly down quick and get it beneath into that clear water. So we fish intermediate line to about 15 feet of lead core, and then your leader setup, again, it can be as hobo and basic as you want it to be, or as if you're trying to go IGFA, legitimate, and you could get away with that. But keeping the leader short, I found, is important. Whatever you want to go with is fine, but keeping it around 7 feet max is ideal, or else you get like this really heavy bow from where the fly position actually is and kind of where your rod tip is, because you'll have that lead core pulling it down, but it actually just does this big belly. So if you have like a 10-foot classic 10-foot leader, you're gonna have too big of a bow. And so keeping a short leader in that 6.5, 7 feet range is where we like to be. And the fish aren't leader shy, so we typically will throw, like if we're just rolling hobo status, we're just running essentially a butt section of 30 pound, a few biminis with 20 pound for our sort of midsection, and then you can get away with 80 pound for your blight tippet, and that's a pretty standard setup. And then the flies, I like to use a slightly weighted fly to help minimize that bow. Like as long as I can get that fly down and the line as tight as possible, that's ideal. Because when that fish hits, it's not like in the Keys or other places where you're going to see the fish visually eat. It's all feel because he's down underneath all this muddy water. So
you're just tight dragging. Are you current dragging? Like, are you just drifting in the boat and it's just kind of current pulling? Is that?
Yeah, that's a very popular technique. Like the captains will run you behind the breakers where the mouth comes out and let the current kind of push you off the sandbar there. And at that point, you're just dumping 50 feet of line behind the boat and kind of hanging on, because when that fish hits, either two things are going to happen. It's going to be a really, really soft tap, because the fish is sort of eating the fly from the back and coming at you, and you'll barely feel that. Or he's going to hit it like a freight train, and it's just going to be absolute insanity. So we get a lot of clients, and even personally, like, you'll miss bites because you'll be like, there's no way that was a tarpon. So I just strip strike everything. Like, if it feels like a sardine, I'm strip striking it.
Yeah.
And you'll be surprised. A lot of times you'll get the slightest little tap, and you'll strip strike, and boom, the fish is out of the water. So it's insane. And then, when you're seeing a lot of schools of fish, then you're casting from the bow into the fish. But for the most part, we do a lot of that drift style behind the breakers, and it's ridiculously effective. I know it's really funny to just pull a boat out in the ocean and dump feathers behind it and sit there and they eat them, but it's
yeah, of all the things, grab this, right?
Yeah, it's just funny. I mean, we're not sure, because unfortunately, there's not a lot of scientific studies or anything done on where these fish are even coming from. But you're dealing with 100-pound fish, 150-pound fish. Like, all these fish are big, big fish, and they're there really just to eat. We think it's speculation, but it makes sense that they're coming between. This is sort of a good stop between Venezuela, Colombia, and what's happening in Yucatan, and then some like Cuba and Jamaica and all this. So I think it seems like these fish are coming here really just to gorge themselves, and then they're moving on either north or south. It's just sort of this in-between land where you have a lot of fish.
Yeah. I mean, like a charging station.
Yeah, exactly. And it's big fish, so it's fish that are definitely on the move.
Yeah. Well, wow, man. You've got yourself quite the adventure going on down there, and you've set yourself up for success for sure. It's been great hearing from you this week and learning a lot about the Costa Rica area and whatnot. I hope people tune into your YouTube channel. I've just enjoyed it thoroughly. And it was great having you on the show, Jesse. Let's get you back here again. Let's talk some more about some other things that you're doing down there, and some of these adventures. I know you do some guiding up in Montana and whatnot as well. So let's do that again, okay?
Awesome, man. I appreciate you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, you got it, man. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us. If you haven't already, subscribe, leave a review, etc. Like I said, go check out Jesse, and we'll tune in next week. We'll see you.